show. Today we're going to talk to Matt Day. Matt is the director of programming for FreedomFest, and in a past life was ran events for FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, and has really done an extraordinary job. And many people have spoken his praises to me about putting on events. And I think events are a really powerful tool for promoting ideas in general, but I also wanted to have Matt on because I think it's really valuable to see ways that people can promote their ideas and career paths people can take to promote their ideas beyond the most obvious ones of being a writer or a speaker, or more broadly focusing on content per se. And so one thing that you should really think about is, if you're passionate about ideas having to do with liberty or passionate about Ayn Rand's ideas, reach out to people in those fields, reach out to those organizations. And one of the questions should be, hey, what are the kinds of jobs that might not be obvious to an outsider that you guys have going on? Because, you know, whether it's something to do with finance and accounting, or whether it's these more kind of social or organizational type jobs, all the way down to the most obvious kinds of content creation, we need great people at every level and in every sphere. And it can sometimes not be obvious that there are these unusual paths to playing a role in fighting for a better future. So with that, let's get on to the conversation with Matt Day. All right, Matt, thanks for coming on. So
Sure.
Most people who become interested in liberty, in my experience, if they decide that they actually want to devote any portion of their life to it, it's usually from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to become a writer or maybe a journalist, or, you know, do podcasting or something. But you have a really fascinating role in promoting liberty. So before at some point, I want to circle back to how you got to where you are today, but I'm just curious to hear like what it is you actually do.
So, obviously events have been a big part of my life for a long time, and we'll get to the history of that. For me, I'm always, and even in general, when I put on events, I'm a very kind of behind the scenes guy. I'm not like one of the people who like to go out and really put myself out there as far as being like a person on stage, or, being a writer, or things like that. So, what I love about the kind of just the event world is it's kind of the collaboration of, bringing all kinds of different experts together and people who are really good at their different roles. And what I like to do is, being in that kind of event world to kind of, oversee all that. It's really helping people do their best, and because a lot of times, especially with speakers, they're not very logistics oriented type people. And so, that's kind of where I always see my niches. I'm a very logistics type of person, and I like to just kind of help people do what they do best, and that's, and I think it just kind of naturally fits with my, I'm a bit of a shy guy. And so I don't like being out there and about, and this is kind of a role that is always needed. And, putting on events is tough work, and it takes a lot of long hours, especially as you get closer to the event. And, there's a lot of flexibility that just kind of comes natural to me as just when I, go through, putting together an event, you just have to be flexible. And that just kind of is generally how I live my life anyway. So it just, all of these kind of things just kind of came together. And, events are just, they're a special thing because it's not something that lasts permanently. It's this culmination of all these people kind of coming together for this moment to share in something. And then, in a blink of an eye, it's kind of over. And there's something lasting though that sticks with people, especially when you do a good event. A bad event will last with people too, in a very different way. But if you manage to put together an event that really gives that response to people, there's something pretty magical about it. And that's kind of where I get my kicks from it.
I mean, a lot of my most enduring memories are from really good events, some really bad ones. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, one of the things I noticed having worked at organizations that went through different event coordinators and planners and things, was that how hard it is. So I'm definitely in the
Mhm.
category of the speaker, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times. It's like I just want somebody to point me in the right direction and tell me when to start talking and when to stop talking. But I don't like everything else is over my head. And um, there's, but I mean, a well done event. So what I mean, here's one aspect of just why I think it's important, not just that we all have
Mhm.
these great memories and get to hear great
Mhm.
speakers. I think a lot of people will discover, they'll read something by Ayn Rand or Hayek or
Mhm.
whomever, and they'll be fascinated, they'll be interested, but they don't know that many people around them who are that interested.
Yeah.
And then they'll go to an event, they'll go to Freedom Fest, or when I worked at the Ayn Rand Institute, we had what we called OCON, our summer conference,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it they'll feel invited into a community, and
Exactly.
that'll last a lifetime, and versus people who, they went through a summer of being really fascinated by these ideas and it just doesn't become part of their lives.
No, that's definitely true. I think that's, there's there's a lot to learn, just reading and obviously going through and doing it on your own and learning these ideas. But you're right, there is something magical about, there's an experience that happens when you all kind of come together and share in that. It's that learning that takes place together, I think, that really connects people. And because you go, especially with these ideas, you kind of you go into this, always not really knowing. And usually, when you're coming to an event, especially, there's obviously in the liberty world, there's the events that are kind of the introductory to these ideas, and those are the ones I like the most, are the ones where you kind of are able to mix people who are new to these ideas and with people who are, lifelong supporters of these ideas. And then, yeah, you really realize how many how passionate people are about especially these ideas, and it's cool to be able to engage those people and get them together under one roof. And it you can connect on a way more personal level than you could ever do, I think, in an online video and in a book. I just think being able to have people under the roof and have them kind of in your care, for however long the event is, there's something that sticks with people, and I think that's the cool thing about events that I personally like.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Over the last year, we've definitely seen the rise of Zoom and other uh, ways that people are gathering online. And I'm curious as to what extent you think that can replace, supplement, um, or just not even come close to getting people in a room together for some period of time.
I think we've all had to have adapted to this circumstance. I once things are back to a sense of normal, I don't think that they will permanently replace events. There's just you, you can't replicate that in-person experience over Zoom. I mean, it's like, it's because what happens at event, because on a Zoom things are so everything's so controlled. What's the special parts of an event are when it's the things that happen organically. It's the people that just kind of find off a little corner and start talking with another, and about these ideas. You can't do that on Zoom, and I think it's been a good mechanism that we've used to be able to stay connected. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see it replacing I hope I don't. I hope it doesn't, because I mean, for a selfish reason, but also it's just, there's something. I mean, you need that personal connection with people, and it's not something you can get over the Zoom. And we've done a few Zoom, even with Freedom Fest, just to be able to continue to do things. And yeah, you get some interesting conversations, and I think they're fun, but it's all the magic that is happening alongside all the content that's happening at an event, you lose. And so, yeah, I don't want that to go away, and I don't think it will go away. And I think once people get a comfortable, become comfortable, I think getting back in spaces with each other, I think that'll. At least I hope so. I hope so. I don't want people to stop coming together.
I hope you're right. I expect that you're right. So, what do you what do you think are some of the factors that make the difference between good and bad events? And I'll just name one factor that I
Mhm.
experienced firsthand when I was first new to pro-liberty ideas and started going to places. And that is, I would often show up. I'd be by myself. I wouldn't know anybody.
Mhm.
And I went to places that did really fantastic jobs of bringing people together, and kind of a lot of the people who are interested in liberty tend to be on the more shy side. Even if,
Yeah.
like, as a speaker I can act extroverted, I'm definitely
Yep.
not the person who's just going to walk up and start talking to people. I will now, because I have a certain, like, level of people are familiar with who I am, but I certainly wasn't at the beginning. And then I would go to some events where you're essentially on your own. And I mean, I remember I would spend multiple days somewhere and come away not knowing anybody and feeling really frustrated. Now, part of that's on me. And I mean,
Yeah.
fundamentally it's on me. But on the other hand, it's, if I was throwing an event, I'd want to help people overcome that barrier, because I know they're not going to come back and have a great experience if they don't. What are some, feel free to comment on that, but any other things that you have in mind when you're trying to think, how can I make this a really great experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's accepting the fact that you are going to have a people coming to this event at all different types of comfort levels, and so you're going to have the extroverts show up who are just wanting to party, and you're going to have the quiet people who are just kind of, really apprehensive. And I think I think you got to be conscious of creating experiences that each of those kind of people will have fun. And I think, for me, when I especially when you're doing a big event, I think it's key right off the bat is to do a huge social event. I think you have to start off an event with some sort of big social kickoff, some sort of social party, something that is just that. Because I think I've seen a lot of times with events it'll go right into the hard content, and I think you got to kind of ease people in because they're coming into this 3-day experience with you, however long it is. And if you don't kind of ease people into that, I'm not, I know I've experimented with doing kind of the networking things and the forced kind of networking games. Honestly, those in my experience haven't worked great because again it's going to attract a certain type of people, and the people who you're most wanting to get to come to those are probably going to be like, oh, that's kind of lame, I don't want to come to that. So I think it's just giving people kind of the freedom to kind of bring it in, and just and really just hospitality. That's the bottom line is just engage the people who you are inviting to these events. And I went to an Atlas event and I think they did a great job with the way they did it. And they essentially had kind of uh, like almost like they were kind of co-hosts that would like part of their organization. So they probably have about 15 or 20 different people, and their job role throughout the event was to just find people who are off on their own and kind of go and engage them and talk to them and bring them over. And we experimented some of that stuff with FECON and having people like go up to people and say, hey, I know this person, you should come and talk to this person, and really trying to facilitate engagement. Because you're right, it's for shy people it's intimidating going to something that's just this insane experience all right off the bat, and you retreat a little bit. And I think if you can help people get over that hump of spend this time with us, spend this, be engaged and encourage people, like put it on them a little bit and say, you chose to come to this, what are you going to do to get out of this? Like, why did you spend the money to come and buy a plane ticket just to sit over there in the corner? Like, put it on them to get out and enjoy this. And I think if you don't come off as I think it's respecting the people you're who are coming to your event, and really respecting them as people, and not just here, oh great, I got my numbers up and we got 1,500 people, that's great. And the only thing about that, it's like these are individuals who made a pretty big conscious effort to see what you're doing, and so help them be excited about that. So yeah, I think it just boils down to hospitality. That's really what it boils down to. And maybe it's being a bit of a Southerner that kind of is in my blood. But
Where are you from, by the way?
I grew up here in Atlanta, and traveled around, but I still live here. My wife and I live here in Atlanta, and that's kind of so I can kind of jump in a little bit to the kind of the history of the event. How I got into this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So it was honestly, this was a family business that started. My mom started when I was about 7 or 8. Her and her business partner started a small event company here in Atlanta where they owned historic homes, and started with one historic home, and they started doing events out of it. And then over the course of about 20 years, grew that into about 7 properties that they have events out of, plus just off-site catering that they events that they did all throughout the Georgia and Atlanta, Metro Atlanta area. And I was when I was in college, I'd always worked with the family business on and off, even before college and even through college and whatnot. And I started kind of getting into these just kind of libertarian-y ideas in college. It was actually my now wife. She's the one who introduced me, because I was actually kind of I remember when I was 18, it was the 2000 election. I was kind of a raging socialist at that time, and voted. I voted for what was the guy who was ran for the Green Party
Nader
back in
that year?
Yeah, I voted Nader that year. And I remember when I met who's now wife, when I came to college, I was kind of, telling her all the stuff about that. And she was like, what, you need to read some books. You're insane. These are not good ideas that you're talking about. So she was actually the one who got me into this. And,
do you remember any of the ones that she initially recommended?
So she gave me, like I think a lot of people in this world, she gave me Atlas Shrugged to read. And that book kind of pushed me into this direction a little bit. And then, I was kind of like, it was kind of an interesting time in college, because I was at that time I was a poli-sci major, and even in college it was easy enough to get decent grades. So I spent most of my time just kind of on my own learning, and so what I would do was do whatever I needed to do for classes, but I'd spend most of my time in the library and just kind of bounce around from books. So obviously starting with Ayn Rand, and read that, and then just kind of would go to their table of contents. This was still fairly new to the internet, so you didn't have that many sources to jump into. And so you just kind of follow who their influences were. And so I spent, a good 2 years just kind of doing the best I could do to get by in college, and made fine grades. But yeah, took most of what I learned out of college just doing it on my own, and really got into these and dove deep into Mises and Hayek. And the good thing about, being in a college library is they had access to every book at that time. So, I was able to just kind of do it on my own. And that was a pretty powerful thing for me. I've always been kind of a self-educator, even, leading up to that. But that was kind of the first time I feel like I really jumped into something that really wasn't influenced by anybody. It really wasn't somebody that was like, oh, go check this out, other than Katie a little bit kind of pushing me. It was kind of this, and the ideas just resonated, and then I think you've probably experienced this when you first jump into this. These ideas just really resonate and help explain a lot of things that, you're especially in a young 20-year-old, you're struggling with trying to understand the world and trying to understand all this, these ideas, and understanding a good basis of economic thought makes sense, and it's something that is just, unfortunately, I see it too often, that just people just don't have a great fundamental understanding of kind of free market economics. And that's frustrating, because the ideas to me seem pretty clear. And so it's, I kind of got off track a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the very striking things to me when I read Ayn Rand, and she makes this point in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, is it's not that people looked at capitalism, thought about it, and rejected it. It's that it never got a hearing. People didn't know what it was, how it worked, how to think about its morality. And so it's really astonishing that you can have something that changed the world. I mean, we've all seen that, GDP per capita graph that flies, off the charts. That should be one of the central questions that any thinker, particularly any political thinker, has to contend with. What made that possible, and how do we not lose it? And yet it's all taken for granted. Nobody questions it. And that can be really astonishing when you think about, like, all right, don't you want to protect that world, the world that made it possible?
Yeah, it is. And, I have a lot of friends who I've grown up with and still that are fairly liberal, and that still kind of stick to that kind of rejecting those ideas. But like you said, it's just it's a difficult concept, and I think and that's what it took for me was spending that time on it, spending having the kind of freedom that those 2 years allowed for me to just sit in the library and read this stuff and really immerse myself in these ideas. And
well, that's the funny part. Like,
of,
I'm generally pretty anti-college. Like, unless you have a really good reason to go, don't go. But on the other hand, I really respect the fact that you'll never have another time in your life where more or less you're like people are subsidizing you for 4 years of reading books.
I mean, you can be so self-indulgent, and luckily I chose to at least spend a good portion of my time on that, obviously. And it's funny that thinking back on that time, how much it influenced the next change, that trajectory in my life. Like, this wasn't, I always, like I said, and when I graduated from college and went on, I did a few things, and then just ultimately, decided to go work with the family business for a while. And that's kind of where my passion for events came. It was always something fun that I got to do as a kid, watching, growing up kind of with an entrepreneurial mom and seeing her start businesses like that and do that. That looking back was actually pretty powerful, and I didn't even quite realize it at the time, how good that is for kids to grow up in that and to see that, this was nothing. And especially in the 80s when they started this, like, this was not, it wasn't a time when, especially in the South, where it was common for women to go do stuff like that and start a business. And this was her and her business partner was, when I was the youngest in my family, and when I started school, she was like, I want to go do something. She grew up as an art teacher, and with that, she went to art school, and then she was an art teacher, and before she had kids, and she always wanted to do something creative like that. And so seeing that happen, and then having the opportunity to work with her on this event and on these events, that's really where I got to see the kind of the exciting aspect of events. Because what I've always, and what I continue to love about them is it is truly a collaborative effort, and you get to bring, because you can't do this on your own. If you're going to put a big event on, you can't do it by yourself. You have to bring in the right people and play off their strengths. And I don't know if you ever, I kind of equate it a little bit to, did you ever work in restaurants growing up? Is that something that you ever got to do?
Well, my grandfather ran one, so I got a little bit of a glimpse into that world.
So there's a collaborative effort, even, every night when you put that on, and events take that even to the next level. And, there were some weekends we were doing like 19 events at a time, like throughout the whole weekend. And it was just the amount of coordination that goes into doing something like that was pretty cool. And, it was bittersweet because, so before I joined up with starting on FECON, my mom passed away. And so that's, I was in my I don't know, how old was I? Mid-20s. Ellis was 2. She actually passed on Ellis's birthday, which was awful in its own right. But Ellis, my oldest son. So it was kind of at this moment in time, I was like, I could stay with this, and I had the opportunity. I could stay with this family business, and and it had been offered to, all right, Matt, you can take this on to the next generation and continue doing this. But what was hard, it was just like, man, this is like one of those moments in time where I was not expecting. I think I was about 27 at the time. I was not expecting that decision to have to be made, and I had always wanted to come back to the kind of those liberty ideas that I had spent so much time kind of falling in love with. And for that time, because I was so immersed in doing these events, that had kind of taken a back seat to everything. I still kind of read the stuff, and I still enjoyed it, and and had my little websites that I like to check out, feed, Mises, all those things. But it was with her dying, and I was just like, all right, what am I going to do for the next 10 years? Am I going to stick with this and keep this family thing going, or her business partner wanted to take the business as well and move on with that, or it's like, I have a little bit of leeway, I could go try something and go into this world that I actually have a huge passion for, and take a bit of a risk and see what happens with it. And everything kind of worked out to push me in that direction. I reached out to Larry Reed and the people over at Fee, and that's when they had kind of gotten into the they've been planning on wanting to do something like FeeCon and start their own big student conference, and they weren't sure when they were going to want to do it. So I was like, look, I have a little bit of time. I'm kind of wanting to transition into that world. And the good thing was Fee was in Atlanta. So I was like, I don't want to have to move, but I was willing to do it if I had to go. I didn't really want to go to DC, which is where a lot of these organizations go, but I was willing to do it. And, then it just kind of all aligned. And so I accepted a position starting with them, and we launched FeeCon. I started in October of 2016 with them, and then we had to have FeeCon had to happen, that next summer. So it was just kind of a whirlwind of introduction to this whole industry, because the idea was we're going to bring people in this industry to this event. So it was kind of a trial by fire, so to speak. And
what year was that again? It was.
So the first FeeCon was 2017. That was the year we launched it, and I think you were there. I think
I was invited as a speaker, and I was booked as a speaker. And then what happened is that's when I left the Ayn Rand Institute to go to work with Alex Epstein at Center for Industrial Progress. Ended up having to cancel, which I regretted, because Fee is one of the organizations I most respect in the liberty movement, and there were some amazing sounding speakers. Or not sounding. There's some speakers there, so that was one of the most painful parts of that transition period.
We should have just had you come anyways. That's too bad. We could just come as an independent speaker. Oh well. But that was great. And what was cool about that was definitely jumping into that was a bit out of my comfort level. I had always been on the event side of doing other people's events. They hire us and we'll put on their events. That was the first real instance in my career where it was like, I'm going to work on something that we control and we're inviting people to. So that was a whole different kind of element to event planning. And still the fundamentals are there and all the bits and pieces have to come together, but it was that event promotion, that angle that, I think was the most difficult thing to learn, because it's and especially for that first one, because it was just like nobody really knew what to expect. I came in with a lot of ideas that I wanted to do, and there was ideas on the table of what they wanted to do, but it was a new venture for everybody at that time. And we were still a young crew working there. There was a lot of, I think that was Sean Malone. He had just started that year, working at Fee. It was a pretty young team at that time, and it was a fun success, and for it to all come together, because that was the cool thing for when organizations decide to do that, it's this kind of coalescing moment when you put an event like that size on for an organization, because you end up having to tap into every single person in that organization to help get it to the finish line. And that was a fun year, that first launch, because it was just, okay, we can do this. We can actually do this. People will actually pay to come to this. We'll find, sponsors will actually help us do this. And then being able to do that for the next, 3 years, that, doing 1, 2, and 3 of those was awesome. So that was
do you feel like you made any mistakes in that first one that you really learned from, or was it more, all right, new challenges and, just incremental learning?
I think incremental learning. Like I said, I think the event promotion aspect is the hardest thing, and because you have to kind of sell a story to people on why they should come to that. And I think that understanding how people, like, knowing how to speak to people who are at different stages of the buying, process. Like, some people are just like, yeah, anything Fee's going to do, I'm going to come to it. And then there's people you have to convince them. So it was like really kind of fine tuning how we're going to message this. You can't just say, oh, we're having a big event, come spend, a couple $100, fly down here, a couple another $100 on a hotel. It's like, you have to actually, and work, and especially on something new like that, you have to convince people. And so I think the messaging on how you promote the event is the thing that we got better at, I think, over the years. And especially for me, is just seeing that all that goes into, because I'm not a marketing oriented minded person. Like I'm kind of I always say, it's like, well, if we just build it right, it'll people will eventually show up. But I was like, well, yeah, but how much time are you going to devote to that? It's like, you still have to get people excited about it. So that's been, I think, for me, the thing I've been able to learn the most is actually putting that effort into how you're going to talk about this. You can't just let the organic stuff happen. You have to kind of structure that and actually build it out. Like, you're going to go after these specific type, this audience, and you're going to talk about it this way with them, and really kind of breaking it down like that.
What's one
And
thing that like that you would do to help people understand why an event like what you were doing at Fee would be appealing? In other words, what kind of values are you appealing to in order to convince somebody to, I mean, like you said, it's a big investment of time, if
Mhm.
nothing else.
I think especially on that event, I think where we found success was really playing up the kind of the entrepreneurial angle, and that was what our lead in was for that event. And because I think across you, if you we never wanted to, obviously, and FEE's not straight up political organization anyways, and we knew that was going to be a loser, because you're never going to bring any new people to it. If you're just going to speak the message, you're going to have your people who come, and that's about it. And so I think, entrepreneurship is one of those things that I think binds people across political spectrum, because, it's kind of in our blood a little bit as Americans, that we're just kind of entrepreneurial people. And I think you can appeal to people on that, on that front. And, when you tie in the philosophy that, in order to be entrepreneurial, you have to there's a kind of political philosophy that has to be in place for, people to have the freedom to do that. And that's kind of where our in was, at least on that event, on those events, was that you get them with the entrepreneurship and bring them in with that. And then when they're, then you are give them, then you have the opportunity to say, all right, there has to be fundamentals in place for entrepreneurs to be successful. And so I think that we found, and even with Freedom Fest, I think we find that that's a similar message. What we're trying to do is just, it's because there's always going to be people who are interested just in the political philosophy, but there's always going to be so many more people who are interested in the kind of the financial reasons why these ideas matter to me. And I think if you can tap into those kind of somewhat selfish reasons, I think you're going to be a little bit more successful, I think, at getting people who aren't just rah libertarians or rah liberty folks to come to these things. So,
Well, and part of what I like about it is that I think if you look historically, there was way too much focus on appealing to. I mean, Ayn Rand had this jab of, she called libertarians in her time hippies of the right,
yeah.
but I think there was too much of a focus on appealing to like hey, we're for smoking pot, and I am for the freedom to take
Yeah.
whatever drugs you want, but I mean, there's like you said, a core of America is that spirit of entrepreneurialism, of building a life that is really meaningful to you, of being risk taking and creative. And nobody else is appealing to that. Like, you'll have kind of hand waving by Republicans and Democrats at business and entrepreneurialism. But people who actually support the free market, which unleashes that in an unrivaled way, like that's where we have a competitive advantage. And those are some of the best people, because if you get entrepreneurial people, they're going to do entrepreneurial things, including in spreading the ideas. So like that is such a great audience to win over, versus I've kind of cultivated entrepreneurialism in myself, but I'm much more that person who would have been there in the 70s debating, like, if you build a road around somebody's house, can you charge them to go through it? And what if you charge $1 million? Like, that's sort of like my natural starting point. And it's much healthier now, where I meet young people and they're like intelligent, grounded, social, cool, like, and that was not true in my experience, even when I got started in the pro liberty world, back in like the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's a maturing industry too. I think that's something that's kind of, I think that's something that you and I and our generation is seeing with this kind of liberty. So this started in really started in the 70s or so, that this industry stood up and became this kind of, where we had all the think tanks, you had all the grassroots things kind of come together and started actually building this bit of a, I call it a liberty industry, and that's kind of what it is. And what's interesting is the people who started it, they're starting to age out of this, and it's moving to that next level of people who are taking, people like us who are going to kind of take the reins of this thing. And that's I wonder, that's kind of the thing that I see. And I, being a bit of a unique perspective in the liberty industry, because I have to work with everybody. We have to bring in, we can't really be ideological, like, we're only going to work with the Libertarian Party, or we're only going to work with the objectivists. It's like we try to find common ground and bring them together. But what I find, and this may be, I don't know, maybe people will take offense to this a little bit, but there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on in the liberty movement. And there's a lot of like, a lot of these organizations that have been here 30, 40 years are like, well, this is the way liberty is, and this is the way you need to do it. And they get, and there's some infighting that I'm noticing, even as new as I am to the liberty world. I've noticed more kind of infighting, and I think there's a healthiness to that. But I also, I wish that would be kind of take a step back to the fact that there's something underlying that all of us love about this stuff. And yeah, we may, once you get further deeper down, we all may disagree on the particulars, and I hope it can survive that, because I think part of it is kind of that old guard kind of moving on a little bit, and maybe becoming a little less relevant than what they were before, when they started, when they were young and doing this stuff from the very beginning. And I think there's a reaction to that kind of, losing your place a little bit in this, and stepping aside and allowing that next generation to come forward and kind of take this on our shoulders. And so, yeah, I hope that the liberty industry continues to grow and thrive. I don't know though. I see problems with it somewhat in that way, but I don't know. What do you feel about that? I mean, is that something
I mean,
you
we
see?
probably disagree a little bit, or maybe even a lot, in that. I mean, I think some of these, disagreements. So one of my views, and this is what I think creates the most tension with people who are kind of outside the objectivist world but value liberty, is that I view anarchism as the antithesis of liberty. So, like, if you think of the classical liberal tradition, like, and even more recently, like a Milton Friedman, or a lot of the people at FEE, like, I view them as there's a lot of common ground and agreement, and they do all kinds of events. And it's not that I won't ever talk to anarchists, but I don't want to do anything that gives the impression that I think that these are kind of similar views with just one, one small difference. We think there should be a government. They don't. Like, that's pretty big.
It's very big.
So I think these are important issues to hash out. And I think it's a difficult thing to figure out how to form useful alliances and coalitions without people undermining what they think is actually right. But I think that kind of thing can be done in healthier ways or in less healthy ways. And so, I think that's something that has to be discovered. I don't run an organization, and so it's easy for me. Like, I work with the people I think are doing something I agree. I imagine if I was an event planner trying to bring people together, that would be a really difficult scenario. So I don't have a great solution to it, although I do think it's an inextricable part. Like, we all know that Monty Python Life of Brian scene where you have the People's Front of Judea and the Judea's People Front. Every intellectual movement has these kinds of risks and disagreements. And as I said, I do think they're healthy in the sense that they reflect people taking ideas seriously, trying to get at, what the truth is. But what your hope is that there is you hope that those can be treated like intelligently, intellectually, and that over time we move to better and better understandings of what those of us who value liberty are really after, and ways that we can work to achieve that.
Yeah, I think, and I think for me, when I'm working on an event like this, and it's, I kind of look at it as, for small event, when you're doing a small event and you have a specific message that you need to get out to people, and you don't expect a huge audience to come to that, and you it's a very focused. I think as an event planner, you should go at it with, all right, I have a very concrete objective that I want with this event. That's what I'm going to do, and that's how we're going to do it. And then this is the takeaways that I expect people to get out of this. When I worked on FECon and then working on FreedomFest, I try to approach it a little differently, because I like bringing together different voices, and I think the way that I try to do it is, you guys are the experts. You as a speaker, you know what's most interesting for people. I don't want to pigeonhole you and say I need you to speak on this, this, and this. And I think a lot of organizations get stuck in that. And I think ultimately what you should be trying to focus on, and what I try to focus on when I do that, is create an environment where that conversation can happen comfortably, and that people can hear all sides, and then try to facilitate debates, facilitate discussion. And I think those are the things that I look towards, when I work on events. Is I don't necessarily go into it and say, all right, I'm gonna bring in these speakers because I know that they're gonna sell this message to people and that they're gonna walk away with that. To me, it's just like there's so much more you can get out of it if you leave it a little organic and say, all right, I've heard this person talk on this, and then I've heard this person have this opinion, and I know they kind of disagree, and let's just bring them together and see how they, and see what they can discover together. And I find most people want to see that. They don't want, and that's, I guess, another thing, thinking about events too, is I'm not big on the lecture style event. Like, I think it has its place, and I think it's important in some regards, but when I'm thinking about the types of sessions I want to put together that I find the most entertaining, that people find most, it's the conversational, panels. It's the debates. Not necessarily have to be a super formal debate, but it's just that back and forth that people really get out of it. Because ultimately, I think what event planners and, in this world probably should understand is that the content typically does take second place to just the overall experience that people are having. Because, and I think a perfect example is, I forget which keynote it was. I think it was the first, I don't remember, but it was a well-known keynote. And I remember talking to someone who had come to FECON, I think that first year. And I talked to him because this person had come back every year. And then I said, oh yeah, remember, I think it was maybe it was Jimmy Wales, and we had him that first year. And I was like, yeah, Jimmy Wales talked on stage with me. He was like, Jimmy Wales was at that? And I'm just like, yeah, we spent a lot of time and money to bring him there. But most people, like, they just kind of, because when you're at an event like that, there's just so much content coming at you. And I think that, ultimately the takeaway is, did that person have a good time? Did I have a good time at this event and feel good about what I experienced? And yeah, maybe I learned something that pushed me into a direction, but yeah, I'm surprised that, because I spend a lot of time on content, and I spend a lot of time on, making sure that we have the subjects that we're interested in at least being talked about. And then to hear someone say, oh, that y'all did that? Yeah, person there was like, well, yeah, okay. So I think it was funny, like, over time, learning that, yeah, maybe people don't necessarily pay as much attention as I'm expecting them to. And so that kind of put me on my focus of, like, you really, if you have to control that experience. You really want people to walk away from this, not feeling like they've wasted their money. And I think that's a big key. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the things I really liked, I went to FreedomFest once and spoke there. And part of what part of why I think it works really well is that it's not, all right, we're pushing a viewpoint. It's precisely, and that's why I don't think there's any issue of, like, me having my ideas confused. Like, everybody there from all over the place, and the organization itself, the idea, as I understand, is we want to bring together people who are interested in liberty, who have different views of what that means and how to do it. But we just want to get them together because it's fun and interesting, and we'll learn a lot. And I think that's a really healthy kind of thing. And then particularly, like you said, if you can get panels where we're getting different kind of perspectives on issues, or how to be more effective in advocacy, or whatever the case may be. And it was one of the most lively kind of, like, comings together.
It is. I mean, our owner, Mark, he's a lively guy, and he likes to, he's a bit of a showman, and I think he brings that to Freedom Fest, is because sometimes, I mean, it's just the fact of the matter. Sometimes you go to events and they're just boring, and you end up sitting in these big lecture halls from hour on end, and you're just kind of like, geez, this is just dragging on. And that's my worst fear of any, like, any planning event, is just looking over and seeing people that are just sitting there just with their heads down and
We
just
got 3
totally
more
unengaged.
hours to go before we can talk to anyone.
That's my biggest fear. And and then as you get closer to an event, that's when you start really like thinking about like, oh my God, I need to add this, I got to add this level to it. And the couple of weeks leading up to an event is an insane time. And it's but sometimes you get some really creative like last minute ideas that just like pop out and you're just like, oh, that's what you need to do. And
What would be an example of that kind of thing? Because that sounds fascinating.
so one thing we did, I, it's always fun. I think it's always fun to add a little bit of whimsy into an event and add a little bit of, some sort of game, something, especially on an event that big, because you have 900,000 people together. Play with them a little bit. Because they're never going to have that many people together in a space that are open to doing something like that. And so, for this the last FeeCon I worked on, we just kept bouncing back on ideas on what we want to do, how we're going to do this, and what we came up with. And it was relatively close to the event. I would say within the last couple of weeks, we decided to do, let's just do this large Lego installation and to kind of illustrate this idea of spontaneous order. And so what we did was we bought like 500 like giant, like the giant cube Legos that are like that big. And we just dumped them out in the middle. And we just created a sign that said, create something, see what happens. And then that over the course of the entire week or the few days was one of the most fun things to do. You'd come down in the morning, someone had snuck off in the middle of the night and just built this insane thing. And then people would just tear it down and build stuff. And it just all throughout the whole week. And it was just like, man, we weren't, we knew we wanted to do something, but it was the pressure of like, we got to do something because this event's coming up to really push that into something. And that was a good one. That was fun. And it was Sean's idea at the time to, he's like, let's just put a camera on this all week and just film it. And so then we had the like great, the time elapse thing of just this thing constantly being built up and broken down. So that was a good one. That solidified in my mind that use this opportunity when you have a couple of thousand people together, like do something to like play with them and they'll usually play back with you and you'll get something cool out of it.
I part of what I love about that is it illustrates sort of like the benefit of always thinking about marketing, right? Because it's if you run a boring event, it doesn't matter if you have the best photographer running around. Like if they're picturing, if your audience is like this for 8 hours, and then it's like, and now we're eating lunch, and then
I know
awful B-roll. Like you're never going to sell the next event using that.
I know.
But if you're thinking of ways to make the event exciting, interesting, people interacting, building stuff with Legos, then you can make the next one more appealing by just showing like this is the kind of magic that happens at our event.
And I think that's important for event planners is like think about that because that's what people are going to remember. I mean, it just is. I mean, people aren't going to remember all the work you put in to like curate this specific message or this specific piece of content. They just won't. They'll take it in and they'll take something from it. But what they're going to remember is that fun party that you were able to put together and all the little weird things that you did there and the way that you encouraged people to, like we have this event app that we used and we really, the first year wasn't that great because we didn't really know what we were doing with the event app. But as we learned it over the course of the couple of iterations of that event, we just, there was so much you could do to like push people to actually engage with one another on this event app. And it was just, and then you just start seeing like all the organic conversation that's happening even within that thing it's just cool. And I think it's just, create those opportunities that allow people to create the event experience that they want as well. Because you have to kind of rely on your attendees to do that. You can only do so much. It's like you have to kind of create the husk of the event, but ultimately you rely on them to make it fun and make it a worthwhile experience. And so I think if you're every step of the way, you're somewhat conscious of that, what can I do to kind of make this experience slightly a little better and hopefully push people to take this and put some real meaning behind it. That's the thing, because I think a lot of time, because there's so many logistics and there's just so many, spreadsheets you're working off of and all that stuff. You get lost in the Herculean task of just pushing this event over the finish line. And it's like, you should step back. You should always step back and edit yourself, because, you know, we had this networking thing we were working on that we were going to do this. It was like this other game we were working on. And it was kind of like this, it was like I don't know what it was. It was kind of like it was like 10 minutes before every session. It was like this kind of like bingo thing or whatever. And then we kept working on it. We were spending so much time like trying to make this thing happen. It was like, oh, but you know, we need people to be able to network and this will do it, blah, blah, blah. And it just got to the point where it's like, we're trying to force something that's not going to be fun. Like, you know, we keep coming, if it's not going to present, if the answer is not presenting itself after all this like effort of trying to do it, just dump it. And I think that's, you know, the event people who are successful are those who are flexible enough to realize, I know I put a lot of work into this idea, but that idea is just not coming together, and I just got to get rid of it and walk away from it and move on to the things that are working. And
well, if free market people can't cash in the sunk cost fallacy, there's no hope for anybody else. That's for sure.
That's true.
Look, I as much as I agree with you about events versus and the kind of overemphasis on content, I am a speaker. I hope that people come at least in part for the content, but a lot of my audience are people who aspire to kind of do things in the liberty space in the realm of ideas. And so what's your advice on, if you want it to be somebody who's attractive to an event planner as somebody they want on their roster, what are the kinds of things you're looking for that a person should be thinking about if they want to make themselves appealing as a speaker?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, for me, it's, you know, when our team starts planning an event, you know, what we'd like to do is we kind of start creating these, like, all right, these are the kind of avenues we want to explore. So like we call them threads or whatever it is. And like, these are the different ideas that hopefully we want to explore throughout this conference. So instead of like that's how I kind of start from building. It's like, so I want to focus on maybe these 15 different ideas, and then start pushing content, you know, and finding people who can do that. You know, the best speakers that I've loved working with are the ones who, like, a lot of times what we'll do is, and I think this is important, is like kind of share that basic outline with make that public. It's like, here's the stuff that we're going to start working on, and don't be afraid. Like, if you're a speaker and you think you could, don't be afraid to like come to an event planner and pitch them an idea, because, you know, while it's like event planners, they have so many different things that they're working on and trying to bring together. If someone packages something for them and delivers it to an event planner and it's good content and it makes sense and it fits in, man, that's awesome. It's like the things I hate the worst working with, and granted, I love all my speakers. Everybody has their way to work, and so, but it's the ones that, you know, it's like, yeah, you're coming to this too. It's like, do the work as well. Like, don't make me do all the work for you, because it probably won't be that successful if you're not bringing something to it. And so I get excited about the speakers who like just reach, you know, because I make my email pretty well known. It's just like, reach out to me and pitch something to me. I'm pretty open. And, you know, I find most event planners typically are just kind of open to that, because there is a need, because you don't, I don't, and I think a lot of, you know, event planners are the same way. I don't want to be heavy-handed as far as like controlling, like, this is what this is. So I'm not a school teacher. I'm not creating a school for people. I rely on experts and rely on speakers who have an interest in what they do to do it in an entertaining way. And so I think a lot of event planners are that natural hesitation to not overly control everything invites, you know, I find it that I think most people would be willing to hear out interesting content that's pitched to them. So that's the biggest thing I say to speakers is, if you have an idea, just share it with me and tell me what you want to do, and let's see and let me help you figure out how to do it. And I think that because every event planner is needing content, they just do. I mean, it's hard to put all that stuff together, and you always have people dropping off. I mean, with FreedomFest, we try to bring 250 speakers to that event, and so you always are having,
it's mind-blowing.
You're always having people like drop off of that. And so, it's nice to have something on the back end to kind of to rely on. And then you get your pets, you get your favorite people that you like working with. And so you never quite know how, what that'll actually do. It's like, because as an event planner, once you find something that works, you kind of, you come back to it because it works, and it's good. And so, you're building this thing of a bunch of different, like, hodgepodge of things. I mean, that's ultimately what an event is. It's just a bunch of different little tiny bits coming together, and you find a bit that works. It's like you're gonna go back to them. And I've there's plenty of speakers that I've worked with that I invite back almost to every big event that I work on, because I know they're going to deliver. And so,
Well, I'm curious if if you've noticed any trends, like in terms of, so setting aside people who are just famous and will
mhm.
draw a crowd for that reason, but of the speakers who, like, you want to have them back, or you hear good things from the audience member, like, oh, I never heard of this guy or girl, but like they really blew me away. What are the kind of characteristics or things that you see showing up in patterns that, like, man, if more speakers were like this, my job
Yeah,
would be a lot easier?
I do think the people who are able to kind of speak from the heart are going to resonate the most. I think if you're just coming, and especially, it's tough in our world, because we have it's very especially in the economics, and it's very heady. And it's like, and if you can talk about this stuff in kind of an emotional way that really connects with people on an emotional level as well as an intellectual level, those have been the ones that I see that people kind of come away from it that are just like, whoa, that really had an effect on me. One of our keynotes that we had, at one of the last VCons that I worked on, he he was a photographer for National Geographic and had been doing it for 50 years. And he didn't know anything about libertarian. Like, he was familiar with what we did, but he kind of came into it as just like, we brought him because he was an interesting entrepreneur, and had this big creative background. And he put together this talk that was just, that literally, I looked over and, like, was watching people crying. Like, I was just like that emotional, and it was so magical to kind of see that. And I think he was able to really tie in these kind of heavy intellectual ideas that, in a way that really elicited emotional response. So I think, be conscious of your delivery. Just going up and doing a PowerPoint presentation doesn't work with, it doesn't cut it anymore. It's like people expect more. It's like we have so much content now, that well produced content that we all grew up with and that we all see, and the younger generation sees it any more than we do. We expect kind of high, we've come to expect, I think, a high standard for how people present ideas. And I think you got to be conscious of that, because, yeah, the days of just, coming in and throwing your PowerPoint up there, and, it's the same thing. It's like, those aren't going to last. And I try to steer away from those. And even when I bring speakers, I'm like, it's like, keep it conversational. It's like, keep talk with the audience. Don't just talk at them, like, talk with them, and talk. And because they're, they chose, especially, when you have a bunch of breakouts that people have 7-8 options to go to, it's like, those are going to be the speakers that people, are, like, talking about in the hallways and talking about in the things. It's like, that person really knew how to talk about this idea in a way that I didn't just spend my time the last 30 minutes on my phone, because that's the worst. That's the worst, when you go into a breakout and you just see it obviously is not working. Nobody's engaged, but they're too embarrassed to get up and walk out. So they're just going to sit there, and those are the
Right.
ones you try to avoid.
Well, Matt, this has been a lot of fun. I know this year has been hard for you and for all of our friends in the event world, and
Yeah,
all of our speakers who, I mean, had
I know.
many of whom had their livings trampled on. But I think one of the lessons I wanted people to come away is there's so many non-obvious opportunities to be engaged in spreading good ideas, whether
Mhm.
it's events, whether it's, all the kinds of things that go into making organizations run, helping people get together, helping them educate themselves. And so I really hope that, particularly young people, um, like, go to the events and spend some time talking to the people who work at them,
Yeah.
the people who work at different organizations, and look at these kind of non-traditional, non-obvious paths, because like we need more good people in every aspect of
I know,
this movie.
I know, and I think that's a good way to put it. I think it's just there are opportunities out there, and there are opportunities for, you know, if you don't just have to be a great writer, you don't just have to be a person who wants to go talk. It's like these industry businesses need employees who know what they're doing, and I think that's a good way to put that, is that it's just go talk to them. Go find out what's needed and do it. It's funny.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Appreciate it. This was fun.